Okay, so imagine looking out at a really dense, chaotic jungle. Um, a typical brain instantly filters out the overwhelming noise of the foliage.
Right, you basically just process a massive generic wall of green.
Exactly. But imagine a brain that just doesn't filter it out, like a brain that instantly processes all that chaos into a highly structured geometric grid.
Right, a brain that immediately notices one single leaf out of, 10,000 is slightly asymmetrical, or that a bird call is off by just a fraction of a second.
Yes, and that is exactly what we're getting into today. Welcome to this custom deep dive. We are exploring a super unexpected, but honestly profoundly important intersection. We're looking at how the cognitive processing of autism spectrum conditions is basically acting as a superpower in wildlife conservation.
It really is. And, what's fascinating here is that historically we've always viewed conservation strictly through a biological lens.
Right, like measuring habitats, tracking populations, that kind of thing.
Exactly, analyzing soil samples and all that. But today, we're shifting gears. We're moving from just looking at what is being observed to completely reevaluating the mind of the observer through a cognitive lens.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission for today's dive is to really understand how neurodiversity isn't just like participating in ecological research, it is actively reshaping and improving it. But to get there, we first need to build a baseline, right?
We do. We have to understand how individuals on the spectrum actually experience the world. And that starts with how the spectrum itself is clinically categorized.
Right, so autism is a spectrum, and it's categorized into 3 support levels. But we have to make this really crucial distinction right up front for you listening.
Yeah, this is key. These levels describe the amount of external support an individual needs to navigate daily life. They are absolutely not a measurement of intelligence.
No, not at all. Not intelligence, not capability, and definitely not scientific potential. I love the analogy from our source document. It compares these levels to the scaffolding around a building.
That's a perfect way to visualize it. The scaffolding just dictates how much external structure is needed for the building to operate or interact with its environment.
Right, so some buildings just need a really minor amount of scaffolding. That aligns with what clinicians call level 1.
Yeah, individuals who are highly independent but might just need some support navigating specific social challenges or sensory sensitivities.
And then some buildings need a massive, intricate network of scaffolding to just remain comfortable and functional. And that aligns with level 2, which requires substantial support, or level 3.
Right, level 3 involves very substantial support and, continuous daily assistance, which often includes limited verbal communication.
But the scaffolding says absolutely nothing about the strength or the brilliance of the architecture inside the building.
Exactly. And that distinction, it changes everything about how we design conservation programs, because the scaffolding is essentially the environment adapting to the individual.
So when we talk about the environment, we really have to talk about the sensory experience of nature. Because the autistic brain processes sensory input, well, entirely differently than a neurotypical brain.
It does. And for many individuals on the spectrum, the natural world offers this profound sense of calm and predictability.
Let's pause on that. Why does nature offer that calm? I mean, think about a modern urban environment for a second. It's just full of unpredictable, chaotic sensory inputs.
Oh yeah, sirens starting without warning, flickering fluorescent lights.
Overlapping conversations in a grocery store, it's constantly demanding your executive function to process and filter it all.
But nature, on the other hand, is built on systematic repetition.
Yeah.
The crashing of waves happens at a measurable rhythmic interval.
Right. Insects move following specific physical laws. A bird call has a very predictable acoustic signature.
Exactly. So a mind that dedicates a massive amount of cognitive energy to processing sensory input doesn't have to stay on high alert out there. The brain isn't expending energy trying to predict the next chaotic event.
It can actually rest in the rhythm of those natural patterns. But there is a dual nature to this, right? Because nature isn't always a quiet, predictable beach.
No, definitely not. For some autistic individuals, unpredictable animal behavior or a sudden, loud sound in a dense habitat, like a jungle canopy during a rainstorm,
Yeah, that can trigger intense sensory overload and distress. It can be just as overwhelming as a busy city street.
exactly. But this dual reaction to sensory input directly translates into a really unique, highly advantageous way of observing the natural world.
Because they aren't filtering things out.
Right. The autistic brain is often wired to process environmental details deeply. So one of the most common cognitive strengths on the spectrum is this profoundly strong attention to detail.
It's the superpower in the weeds. And when you connect this raw attention to detail to conservation tasks, I mean, the results are just staggering.
We are talking about observers who can identify incredibly subtle physical differences between species, differences that look entirely identical to an untrained neurotypical eye.
They can observe minute, repetitive behavioral patterns in an animal population, or detect these microshifts in an environment that standard researchers completely gloss over.
Because a neurotypical brain has actually evolved to filter out those micro details. If you are walking through the woods, your brain actively wants to ignore the specific shape of the bark.
Right, so it can scan for macro threats, like a predator jumping out.
Exactly. But the conservation crises we are facing today, climate change, habitat degradation, subtle biodiversity loss, they are macro threats yet. They start as micro changes.
Wait, but let me challenge this for a second. Isn't the wild inherently chaotic? I mean, a forest isn't a spreadsheet.
That's a fair point, yeah.
An ecosystem has millions of variables just interacting violently with each other. How does a mind that thrives on structure and predictability handle the completely unpredictable reality of the wild?
Well, you're looking at nature on a macro level. Yes, macro nature is chaotic. A thunderstorm, a stampeding herd, a sudden drought, those are totally unpredictable events.
Right.
But micro nature is highly, beautifully systematic. Think about the intricate, repeating geometric patterns on a single fern leaf, or the exact symmetrical markings on a moth's wings.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, nature at its microscopic and foundational level is just a series of complex repeating systems.
It's like the code of the forest. They are seeing the underlying code, while the rest of us are just staring at the monitor, taking in the generalized picture.
Precisely. And the ability to spot anomalies in those systems, to notice when one single data point in the code is slightly off, that is exactly why cognitive diversity is a massive scientific advantage.
So a neurotypical researcher might look at a dense patch of forest and just categorize the entire thing as healthy foliage.
Right. But a neurodivergent researcher might look at that exact same patch and immediately notice that the specific shade of green on one plant species has shifted by a fraction of a degree.
Which could indicate an early change in soil acidity or something like that.
Exactly. But knowing that these incredible observational strengths exist, how does the scientific community actually harness them?
Right, because traditional academic pathways present massive structural barriers. Getting a PhD, navigating university department politics, surviving loud academic conferences.
Yeah, those environments are practically designed to exclude someone with specific sensory or social support needs.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The bridge here is citizen science. Platforms like iNaturalist or eBird serve as these great equalizers in conservation research.
They completely bypass the traditional academic barriers to entry. You don't need a formal degree, and you certainly don't need to thrive at a networking cocktail party to contribute.
You can just contribute real, actionable ecological data to global databases. It's basically the open source software of the natural world.
I love that comparison. And what's brilliant is how these platforms organically scale to fit the exact support needs of the user.
Right. So let's look at how a highly independent individual, someone with level 1 support needs, engages with these platforms.
Well, they might be entirely managing complex data sets. They can go out into the field independently, lead biodiversity surveys, publish findings.
Run intricate camera trapping projects without any institutional oversight. They're basically functioning as independent lead researchers.
Exactly. Meanwhile, an individual who requires substantial daily support, someone who thrives best in highly structured, predictable environments, might engage with that same platform entirely differently.
But with just as much impact. They might excel in tasks like data entry, photo classification, or participating in guided field surveys where clear routines are established.
Right. Imagine a research organization has 50,000 photos from a camera trap deep in the Amazon, and they need to identify every time a specific, highly camouflaged feline appears.
Oh, a neurotypical mind sorting through those photos is going to experience cognitive fatigue so fast.
Yeah, they get bored, they lose dopamine, their focus drops, and they start making errors. But a mind that thrives on routine, pattern recognition, and systematic review.
They enter that state of deep focus.
Yes. They execute that task with a level of precision and accuracy that is practically unmatched.
And even for individuals who require very substantial continuous support level 3 participation is still incredibly valid. It might just be indirect.
Right, like assisted observation or simple recording tasks done alongside a support worker, or even just therapeutic sensory engagement with a natural space.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it democratizes the entire concept of who gets to be called a scientist.
It absolutely does. But we also have to look at the psychological mechanism happening on the other side of this. We know what they're giving to the scientific community.
Right, the data collection is revolutionary. But what is this data collection doing for them on a human level?
It's transformative. Engaging in this conservation work actively reduces anxiety and sensory overload for the participants. Structured scientific tasks provide a profound sense of clarity.
And purpose. There are documented cases where involvement in these citizen science projects has actually improved communication skills.
Yeah, and created tangible pathways to employment or long-term volunteering.
Right.
I mean, consider the reality of moving through a society that constantly tells you your brain is a deficit.
Right. If you spend your life in a world built for neurotypical people, you're often implicitly treated as a patient.
Exactly, someone who fundamentally requires management. But when you are given a defined, highly valued role in a global scientific project, that narrative completely shatters.
Your unique way of seeing the world isn't a problem to be solved. It is literally the exact tool required to solve the global problem.
That psychological shift is monumental. It moves an individual's self-perception from feeling marginalized to feeling essential. They aren't just doing science anymore.
Conservation becomes a core, empowering part of their identity. They belong to a community that actively relies on their cognitive strengths.
But as incredible as these digital platforms and remote analysis roles are, what happens when autistic individuals want to step away from the keyboard?
Right, when they actually want to work out in the physical field. This transitions us away from the individual's capabilities and puts the spotlight entirely on the professional conservation community.
Are they ready? Fieldwork is absolutely possible, and it is happening. But it requires organizations to implement specific environmental adaptations.
They have to actively build that scaffolding we talked about earlier.
Yes, designing sensory-friendly environments, establishing highly predictable schedules, providing crystal clear instructions, and keeping teams small and supportive.
Let's break down why a predictable schedule is a scientific necessity here, not just a preference. If an organization runs a chaotic, fly-by-the-seat-of-your-pants expedition,
A neurodivergent researcher might have to dedicate a massive amount of cognitive energy just to process the unpredictable changes, just to figure out what is happening next.
Exactly. But when an organization provides a rigid schedule and completely clear expectations, they free up all of that executive function.
The researcher isn't spending energy worrying about logistics or navigating unspoken social dynamics. They pour 100% of their processing power into the ecological data.
Which in practice means choosing quiet survey areas instead of crowded expeditions, right?
Right, and utilizing technology like remote camera traps so researchers can gather data without requiring direct exposure to unpredictable, harsh elements.
So what does this all mean? If diverse teams with neurodivergent contributors, literally outperform homogeneous ones, why is the conservation world still lagging behind? Is it just institutional inertia?
This raises an important question, and it validates a lot of frustration. The reality is there's a severe lack of awareness. Team leaders receive limited to no training, and structured inclusion programs are rare.
It almost feels like the scientific community is judging the quality of the science based entirely on the neurotypical social skills of the scientists.
That is exactly what happens in academia. Institutions have historically valued a very rigid type of communication. If you cannot deliver a charismatic presentation,
Or politically maneuver through a department.
exactly. If you can't network aggressively to secure funding, the institution often mistakes that different communication style for a lack of scientific capability.
We lose out on brilliant ecological minds simply because they don't thrive in the traditional corporate structure of academia. That's tragic.
It really is. The key to the future has to be mutual understanding. Institutions need to design research projects with flexible participation roles right from the start.
Rather than trying to retrofit a neurodivergent mind into a neurotypical box, we have to completely reframe what a scientist looks like, sounds like, and how they process the world.
The overarching takeaway from exploring all these sources is that autism and conservation are not separate worlds. They intersect beautifully through curiosity, observation, and nature.
The ultimate takeaway isn't whether autistic individuals can contribute. I mean, they already are, brilliantly, through citizen science.
Right. The question is whether the professional conservation field is ready to adapt its own scaffolding to fully include them.
It all comes back to how we view the data. Are we looking at the entire ecosystem, or are we just staring at that generic wall of green?
Exactly. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you step back out into your day.
Oh, lay it on us.
If neurodivergent minds are biologically wired to detect the subtle environmental changes, the hidden systems, and the micro patterns that neurotypical minds routinely gloss over,
Yeah.
are we perhaps failing to solve our most urgent climate and conservation crises simply because we've only been looking at the data with one type of brain?
Wow. That is a massive question to sit with. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning how the world works, keep looking for those hidden patterns, and we will see you next time.